G'day guys, welcome back to Sunset City. You know, when I record these episodes, I usually talk stuff like, super happy with how it turned out, really happy with this build. Today, I'm pretty happy with this build, but I honestly didn't really do the place I was taking inspiration from justice. I dived into this build wanting to fulfill a bit of the residential demand that we were starting to see, but then also fill this space that has been bothering me for ages, been vacant for ages, so I wanted to fill it up. So I did what I always do, jumped to Google Earth and flew over Miami and found an area that was very similar to what I wanted to build. And in fact, when I was planning the series Sunset City, I'd always planned to build this area because it is an area of the city that has kind of fascinated me. I always found it interesting that a place so close to the downtown could also have so many vacant lots. A place that looks quite different to the rest of the way that the city of Miami has been sprawled out, and I always thought that this would be an interesting place to build. But unfortunately, I left it at that, started building, and it's not until I started recording this commentary I realized that there's a lot more going on down here than, of course, just looking from afar on Google Earth and just making a whole bunch of assumptions. So, before I start talking about Overtown, the neighborhood that I am taking inspiration from, on screen you're going to see me scrolling through Find It, basically going through all the apartments that I have, and I'm just trying to find the types of apartments that I want around these neighborhoods. There's going to be a lot of neighborhoods around the downtown that are going to be fairly high density, and I want apartments to look a particular way. So I'm going through, using Find It, using the tags, and giving them a tag so that I can, later on, just search for them and plop them down super easy. So Overtown, it is part of this historical heart of Miami. It is one of the oldest neighborhoods of Miami, in fact, and it was designated as a colored neighborhood back in 1896 and has been an important and significant black community ever since. And back in the day, this place was a center for nightly entertainment. It was full of shops and restaurants, and we're talking post-World War II, this place was full of nightclubs and just a bustling place, a real lively neighborhood. However, in the 1950s, the area experienced some serious economic decline with urban renewal and the construction of these massive highway overpasses, which seemed to be the done thing back in the 60s over predominantly black neighborhoods. And of course, this area saw thousands and thousands of people displaced, businesses relocated, and of course, the suburb of Overtown labeled as a ghetto. So because of all this, you do now have a lot of these vacant spots, these vacant lots where houses used to be, where shops used to be, and people move, people leave, and they're left with places like this. Now, reading about it today sounds like Overtown is actually experiencing quite a lot of gentrification, and there's quite a lot of change happening, a lot of construction, and even me just jumping onto Google Earth and flying down to what looks like a vacant lot. But then as soon as I get to Street View, that's already been constructed into like a Target or an apartment complex or something like that. So with that in mind, I have to also imagine what this place was like in the 80s. You know, the changes that we see today weren't really happening back in the 80s. In fact, all that economic decline had only really just happened, and this place was experiencing quite a lot of that. So with all that in mind, I think I need to go back and change a couple of things within our suburb that we're creating. By the way, we'd need a name for this suburb, and also maybe a little bit of a backstory too. I'd like to change things up, make it our own, and think about what this area represents. I think that I would like to place down more significant buildings and a bit more of a nod to that significant past that I had, because at the moment, all I am going to really focus on building are apartments, public housing, and a couple of vacant lots. But I feel like we can do better in terms of, you know, showing there's a bit more history down here, showing that there's an old commercial district, an old town center, and just showing that it's changed over time. So I'd like to come back down here. So far in this episode, I have been working on this public housing area that's taken up a good chunk of the neighborhood. I'm going to be building a couple more of these around the map and around the city. And now I'm working on this, couple of blocks that I was just trying to get the feeling for, trying to figure out what kind of thing I can create. And, I'm trying to go for apartments, trying to feel that demand. And also, being close to the downtown, these areas are going to have, much higher density than other areas of the city. But what I like, going back to what I would like to do, I would like to actually add in more single family houses. As you can see, we have a couple down there, but not a huge amount. I would like to place down a few more, maybe some that are abandoned, maybe some that still see families there. I've created this back alley behind these houses and apartments because, you know, a lot of these places do have these back alleys, and I really love the look of them. I think they look they just add so much to these areas, particularly these areas close to downtowns and in the heart of the city. So I've created one of them, and I have used a pedestrian pathway, just the propless version, typing in propless into Find It. And I think they look so good. They work a lot better than the roads, you know, even the narrow roads, just because they don't make an intersection on the road when it connects up. And I think the textures on these are pretty nice. Plus people will walk on them, which you typically see. You'd see more people walking on them than cars driving on them. And then placing down some trees. I try to place down trees big trees to hide imperfections, and then lots of palm trees because this is based in Miami, and that really sells the Miami vibe. Got these great Spark couches. These are just so great, made by the creator Spark, who creates all sorts of assets that are just like this and are just perfect for places like this. I also figured that a strip mall would be great for this area. It fits in well with this corner. As you can see, this corner's got a bit of a curve to it. So I figured that this would be a good spot for something like this because you can make the car park just a little bit more tailored to these areas. So I try to reserve corners and roads that are a little bit obscure. I try to use them for car parks or for buildings that you know, not exactly just the straight and, you know, a rectangle basically. So this works well. The car park fits in well. So a little bit tailored, a little bit custom. I'm using these planters to cover up a couple of the edges that don't look as nice. And then there was just a little bit of grass poking through between the asphalt and the pavement, so I decided to place down some weeds in there. And then this place was starting to look a little bit average, you know, a bit kind of like cracked up and broken and not well looked after. So I figured that rather than putting down any lines for our parking, they're going to be there, but you can't actually see them, you know, just sort of park wherever. It's all cracked and broken and lots of stains on the ground. And I even found this Starlet Shopping Plaza sign that I placed at the front. Looks super nice there. And then even some little shop signs that go on top on each little shopping area. I think that looked pretty nice. And then some shopping trolleys just scattered around, you know, left wherever, and even some around some of the houses just in the local neighborhoods. Being so close to the highway, I also wanted to place down some billboards. At the moment, I'm using these Condo ones, and I don't know how 80s they are, but they look super nice, so I had to place them down. I like to replace some of these with some more custom ones, which look, you're gonna see a little bit later on in this series. There's some custom ones on the way. They're gonna look super nice. Continuing our suburbs, I have 2 more blocks that I wanted to fill, and I was getting into the swing of things, you know, getting a bit of an idea of how these suburbs were going to take shape and start to look. I started to change up some of the roads, making them a little bit more cracked. These ones have got far better looking surfaces and just real nice texture to them. And the houses that I'm placing down, because I've made that tag, just makes it super easy just to scroll through and find the different houses that I want. And you know, I'm just trying to find houses this time around, more single family houses. Some of them probably got a couple of different families living in them because they are a little bit longer, a little bit bigger. And you know, a lot of the houses within these areas also, you know, they're made for single family, but then they have so many extensions to them that they end up being subdivided, or you know, just get a lot of people living in these places. So trying to show that high density as well. And again, something I might change a little bit, maybe making some more single family houses in some areas. You know, I do like the mix down here, and I do really like the use of space. You know, I do kind of like, you know, the fences that mark these open lots, and even having some of these open lots, and then even just showing that some of the ground down here is, you know, rough around the edges as, you know, dirt patches, and, you know, particularly where you've had a house sit and then it's been, you know, demolished or sat abandoned for many years. So you're left with, you know, quite a bit of, you know, just not left with green grass anymore. And I think that's something I keep forgetting about in Sunset City, because we have been kind of building quite quickly. In areas like this, I haven't really been changing the ground color. So we've had a lot of green grass, but a lot of these places don't just have green grass. But with those blocks now complete, I wanted to let the simulation run a little bit and just see people move in, and I realized that I was losing a lot of money because I'd actually basically removed a whole bunch of houses and I hadn't really replaced them. So I decided to use my Rico settings and go through to some of the buildings that sat in the downtown and create local files for them. And this is basically, not really, local saves. And what I'm doing here is I'm just changing the settings so that these are operating as residential buildings now, rather than a unique building, which is basically just a park, which doesn't really make any sense. So the Rico mod is so useful for this because you're actually giving purpose to these buildings rather than just sitting there and creating land value, which, you know, they would create land value, but they would either be offices, or they'd have people working in here, living in there, or they'd have people working there. They could be commercial. And that goes for some of these other houses that I've got within these neighborhoods. I felt like they needed more residents or more families living in those places. So some of the apartments I've turned into, you know, just to hold a couple of extra. Rather than being a single family house, this is now a multi-family house. And I went through and did that to a whole bunch of different places. A lot of apartments that were only unique buildings, but I felt like they should be residential, and even some offices. And after doing a little bit of this, I was able to see profits again because people were moving back in and the city was, I felt like, functioning a lot better. And also the population was really starting to rise up, which was lovely. I felt like we really needed that to happen. I also found this great building that fits in just so beautifully to that corner there. So I decided to place that down, maybe a little bit big in that area, but I don't know, I think it kind of looks cool. These condos are also some buildings that I have now turned into Rico buildings. So these are holding quite a lot of people, and I'm sort of imagining that this is some sort of maybe retirement condo, or maybe this is just like a new development. I'm still not really quite sure, but they do look quite nice. Just putting in some minimal detail, and potentially could move these to the other side of the river. I'm planning to build a fairly wealthy neighborhood on that side. I found this pretty interesting block of houses in Miami, and I thought it'd be sort of fun to do something like this somewhere in Sunset City, you know, just to break up a bit of what is a pretty standard grid pattern. You know, I did speak about this before, but I'm trying to show the differences in the types of road layouts, and I made the assumption that Miami is, you know, very gridded, and it's, you know, very straight and, you know, not interesting. But really, you can find some pretty interesting patterns, and because we are condensing everything into a much smaller space than what Miami really is, I guess. I mean, how much smaller can you possibly get? This is, you know, trying to fit in so much onto a tiny map. But because we are also looking at different types of road layouts in Miami, there are little things like this that pop up, and they, you know, create just those little differences that I think, like, when it all gets combined, it then starts to make some pretty interesting stuff. So kind of like what's going on down here. And I thought that underneath the highway, this is probably making the most amount of sense, because I would imagine that a block like this would have probably changed quite a lot. And, you know, this is these are the sort of areas that housing developments like this that are looking to develop an entire block or even 2 blocks, then they'd look at something like this, and then they'd be able to develop it much easier than if it was completely occupied by residents. This is, you know, what developers do. They look for areas that are easy to develop, but also in prime location. Something that I was trying to do was I wanted to keep this grassy sidewalk on the side of these roads because it's nice and wide, and people who are driving through this area, it's only going to be people who live within this community. So I decided to create this tiny little sidewalk just on the side of this grassy sidewalk. And I just love the way this looks, because you've got this big grassed area right next to the road, which is something that you don't really have in City Skylines. I haven't really seen any assets like that. Dragging out a wall as well. These developments are usually all walled in, and you know, this is a great way to add just a little bit of detail without actually having to really add in too much detail. But you know what, speaking of detail, we're going to start detailing something up, because I have really been struggling to find some assets that really match the types of apartments that you find in places like Miami, in places like Los Angeles, you know, these classic American apartments. I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be a huge amount of these on the Steam Workshop. I haven't really been able to find anything like this. And I figured that I'd use this motel that was made by Revo as part of the Mid-Century pack. And I mean, this is an excellent looking building and it looks great as a motel, but the size of it is too large for an apartment building. In fact, I feel like you actually need to scale it down so that it fits onto about a 4x4 tile, which is about the size of most blocks within Sunset City. I mean, a lot of houses would sit on about 2x4, but I think most apartments probably fit on about, you know, a little bit larger than that. So this was pretty easy to scale down because there are some clear areas that I can actually just grab those nodes and then just blend them into each other. And it's definitely something that worked pretty well. Like, it definitely fitted in. There was a door that was a little bit of a tiny door there, so whoever lives there, I do kind of feel bad for that person because I got like obviously a much smaller apartment and a tiny door. But just trying to scale it down just so it fits onto that one block. The reason why I was trying to do that is because I figured that if you were going to build an apartment like this, then it would be, they'd try to make it the same size of your average, at least the same block of land as your average house or average apartment. You wouldn't go much larger than that. That's okay for like a motel or something, but for an apartment, you need it to all be about the same size. But I really wanted this to feel a particular way, have a real style to it, and I decided to detail up the courtyard, placing down some grass surfaces and then also some palm trees as per usual, just here and there. But I did really want to detail this up. You know, there's some areas that I would like to be really detailed, other areas can kind of go under the radar, but this one I really wanted just to see just those expansion joints, placing down those decals, and I'll also place down some little worn decals and just some little trash piles. These are random, so every time that I place one down, they kind of turn into a different type of trash that's being placed there. And then these are the same with these screen doors or security doors. I could just put them into there just to create a little bit of a difference. And then that way, when I copy and paste them into other locations, then they all randomize and they all look fairly different, but the buildings stay the same, which is totally fine because you know, these buildings do look all the same. Like, a lot of these are very similar, which is going to make it really nice and easy for when we expand into other parts of Sunset City, because I can reuse these in different areas. Because they're procedural objects, they don't behave like apartments anymore. So what I do is I grab these service, I don't actually do it in this video, but I do it after, but I grab these service blocks that they're basically little cubes, and you can place them inside these buildings, and then that allows them to be functional residential buildings, and I can make it so that they house as many people as I like. But as I place down the last buildings of this area, like I said, I'd like to come down and work on this part again. I'd like to add some more significant buildings down here, and just create a little bit more of a sense of, you know, this place is a bit more historical, there's a bit more of a culture down here rather than just apartments, houses, you know, small commercial districts. I think we can create something a little bit more interesting, but that is for a little bit later on. But for now, guys, big thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. I'll be live streaming on the weekend, so look out for that. Oceania will be back, and another Sunset City episode next week. To my treasured and beloved patrons, Grant Robertson, Ryan, Roger Davies, Nick Dutton, Harry Wilson, Ricky Merriman, Omar Salika, Chance A, Marcus Thompson, and Cesare Grossi, thank you guys so much for your support over on Patreon. And thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.